The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the WorldTeach India Summer Webinar. We are so excited to have you on the line. My name is Caitlin Ivester. I'm the Director of Communications at WorldTeach, and we are all really eager to share with you more about our program in India tonight. Tonight, just to kind of give an overview, we'll discuss training, placements, culture, and the volunteer experience in the local classroom and the broader community. And we're very lucky to have a distinguished panel with us tonight. And this panel is made up of the current leader of the pack in India, our field director, Behzad Larry, as well as an alum of the most recent program, Riker McIntyre. So we're really happy to have them on the line and share their experiences with us. Without further ado, let's have Behzad take over and tell us a little bit about himself.
Thanks for the introduction, Caitlin. So Riker and I will start by going through the program, and then, which is right over here, and then WorldTeach and I will cover logistics for the program, and then finally at the end we'll save some time for questions from you. My name is Behzad Larry. I'm the field director in India for WorldTeach, and previously I have served as a volunteer myself for some other programs, notably the Clinton Fellowship. And so I'm quite familiar with the types of experiences a lot of our volunteers experience when living abroad, when working in a country that's new to them, and working in communities that are very foreign. So, and then of course we'll hear from Riker, who was a volunteer with us just this past summer, and some of the things he liked best about the program and some of the experiences that he found to be very, very important. So what we'll start with is a high-level program overview. And the first thing I'm sure you're wondering is, where is Ladakh? It's located right up in the very north of India. It's sandwiched on the right side by China and on the left by Pakistan. So east and west are China and Pakistan, and then towards the north is mostly Central Asia. So it's a really unique place because it also exhibits a lot of cultural fluidity from its thousands of years on the Silk Road, connecting these ancient cultures and being a melting pot of sorts between the east and the west, and of these connecting trade routes that came up from the south, from India. And it's a really special place, not just to me, but to a lot of our volunteers that come through as well, because it's a very unique slice of India. So while most people think of India in a particular way, this is very, very different from the India of your imagination, good or bad. And it's a very unique place because of the high mountains and the really warm communities spread out all along. So why participate on this program, and who are the people that participate on this program? So Ladakh, being pretty mountainous, is primarily a rural place with a few pockets of urban areas, a few little district towns, and a big capital city called Leh. It's an interesting place educationally because it's been cut off for a long time because of the high mountains from the rest of India, not just in culture, but also in how frequently they had access to new ways of thinking about education, new ways of living, and therefore it is a mix of traditional Buddhist ways of learning, of traditional Muslim ways of learning, which are now being mixed with the state educational services. And so we find it a unique place to work with volunteer teachers, and we find it a compelling place for volunteers to spend 2 months, because they get to access ways of living that are rapidly disappearing in other parts of the world. You know, they're very community focused. They're working in small villages, they're working in small towns where they get a lot of access to what life was like in places like these before they became hyper-connected, before people were really modernized, and before technology took over every part of people's lives. So it's a unique place to work. The overall program is 2 months, June and July. In August, in the first week of August or so, we depart. It's an 8-week-long program, and most of the volunteers are placed in semi-rural or rural locations across Ladakh. The main focus of the program, besides the volunteers teaching English or computers or certain vocational skills, is in fact the volunteers themselves learning about climate change and how it's affecting communities who live in this corner of the world. Glaciers are really easy to access. You see them all over Ladakh, and they're in fact receding. And so there's lots of interesting stories and actual research that can be done that's primary and cultural that leads to a much better understanding of what climate change means and what climate change is like on the front lines, where people are actually going to experience it first. Most of the volunteers end up teaching a lot of English, both to the teachers who work at the school and provide a lot of computer literacy, also to the teachers. And then, of course, all of this is provided to the students daily through different classes as well. The teaching placements can be a government school, can be private schools, or even some of the monasteries or nunneries that have schools that provide pretty good education across Ladakh. We initially start out with an orientation shortly after arrival. So volunteers fly into Delhi the first day, and the second day we fly from Delhi to Leh. And we spend a couple of days just acclimatizing to the high altitude. Leh is about 10,000 feet above sea level. And once we're done with acclimatizing, we do an orientation that lasts about a week. And we cover a whole bunch of things. We basically get people situated across understanding what sort of lives they're going to be living for the next 2 months, what is important culturally, what is important for their health and well-being, what is important for just assimilating a little better culturally into the communities they're going to live and work in, and then talk vocationally about how they can get the most achieved in their short time in Ladakh. So we're also going to, through this whole process, weave climate change into it and discuss how communities are working to combat climate change, how communities are working on sustainability, even though they're already a very sustainable community to start with. And then also on what roles our volunteers can play when they return to the US to champion the cause, to discuss the cause, and to understand and continue learning more about the topic once they're back. Riker, I'd like to ask you a little bit about what were some of the things you found most, what were some of the most important things you learned during orientation, and what you were surprised by?
Hey everyone, like Bazad said, I'm Riker. I volunteered this past summer. So a few of the most important things that we learned were especially about the Ladakh culture and customs. I mean, we really had tea and visited a lot of Ladakhi families, and through the staff, Bazad and Rashid and Ragzeen, whom you'll meet if you decide to do it, were really, really helpful on helping us understand the culture and the customs of the people in Ladakh. And I really found that to be probably the most important thing that we learned during orientation, simply because it really allowed us volunteers to kind of understand how the people worked in the area and how we could most effectively interact with them in both the teaching setting and just in the social setting. In addition to this, we learned a lot of Ladakhi language skills, just so we could be equipped to have basic conversations. There are people in the communities who do not speak English, and so it was very helpful to have some of those basic Ladakhi lessons, and it was actually pretty surprising how much we were all able to pick up by the end of volunteering experience. And in addition to all that, of course, we learned some simple habits like how to do your laundry by hand and some other things like that. And it was very helpful just to learn how to live and to learn how to interact with people and to learn what the culture is like. And it definitely prepared us well going forward throughout the rest of the time. And probably the most surprising thing during orientation was how important having tea was to the communities in Ladakh. It sounds kind of trivial, but it's actually a very big part of the culture there. Inviting people over for tea, just having tea when you come home. I mean, the people in Ladakh practically don't even drink water. They have so much tea. And it's a really big social thing that they do. And it was a lot of fun to be able to visit lots of different families and share lots of experiences over such a simple thing like that.
Thanks, Riker. Yeah, tea is a big part of life in Ladakh and Central Asia and Tibet, and it's often, it's a social lubricant during the daytime. And Riker and his fellow volunteers surprised us by how quickly they picked up much of Ladakhi and, in fact, how good they were at singing some of the songs. So moving on, communities are small. Some of the communities tend to be about 30 households, 50 households or so. Some of them are even smaller, maybe 10 households. But the schools tend to be a little more scattered. So 2 or 3 communities that are spread out about 5 or 6 miles might share the same high school or the same middle school or a combination of middle school and high school. The accommodation for the most part tends to be with homestays, which are a lot of fun. The region itself is, for the most part, lacking in power through the whole day. So most of the time you get electricity in the evening hours and not through the daytime. It means that fellows, the volunteers, are living in much more traditional conditions, but they still have access to things like power and showers and things generally in the evening if they've got heating available. Otherwise, internet can be iffy. In some places there's decent connectivity, in some places there's no connectivity. So a lot of our volunteers coped with no internet for a while, and I was often sending emails on their behalf. But it is always, I think, a really good and interesting digital detox. Riker, can you just pop in a little bit and very shortly say what it's like living without internet and if that is a problem?
Yeah, it really is not a problem at all. I mean, if you're nervous about it, it's understandable given how much we rely on it in our Western culture, of course. But once you're off the grid, it's really just an incredible experience. You kind of forget, the reasons why you use it because it really becomes such a part of life that you do not need to rely on when you're living with this community. It was really incredible just to be able to partake in the community when we were in Zanskar and fully immerse ourselves and not have to worry about what's going on online or through social media or any of that kind of thing. As far as communication with the outside world goes, in terms of like making sure that your parents know that you're safe, it's definitely possible to do that. They have a satellite phone in the village, and it's Bazad and the staff make it really easy for you to be able to update him if you need to, and all of that is definitely doable, but it's actually a very unique and great experience.
Thanks. A lot of our volunteers, and personally I do as well, find that one of the highlights of the program is the homestay and your host family. Almost everyone tends to make really strong bonds. The families themselves are incredibly eager to host someone who has dedicated, these 6, 7, 8 weeks to helping their students and their children and their neighbors' kids learn and to see the teacher skills improve over their short time there. So there's a great honor associated with being one of the volunteers, and they're treated as such as guests of honor through their time there. You do get to partake in a lot of celebrations of sorts. The Dalai Lama visits at some point. His Holiness comes to Ladakh for a few weeks each year, and there's a lot of weddings and celebrations and things of that sort. So there's a lot of opportunity for community interaction. A lot of our volunteers also, if they have the associated athletic skills, teach the kids certain types of sports or start arranging some after-school activities that the kids have not seen before, such as clean your village up. So here's a photo of something one of our volunteers did last year, where she did this little drive, which was all powered by the kids from the school, where they went up through the village and collected all sorts of trash and erected some trash cans and had this sort of awareness campaign about how important it is to not litter. Then there are also a lot of tasks associated with the homestay for volunteers who are so inclined. Those can range from milking the cows to helping with the harvest to working in the fields. But those are also, you have to put yourself in the position to actively ask for some of those tasks, because no one's just going to sort of pull you aside and say, hey, you've got to work in the field, because that'd be too insulting to a guest. So, but for fellows who do like to do those things, it's very easy to sort of put yourself in that position. Riker, could you talk a little bit about your homestay in Zanskar and what your engagement with the community looked like?
Yeah, so it was kind of like what you said with the whole honor thing, that it's very unique to see the honor that they bestow upon you as a guest. One of the most surprising things about the experience was how many kadaks we received, which is kind of a ceremonial white scarf that they bestow on people for various honors. Like if somebody's getting married, then they will get tons and tons of kadak. And so just the sheer amount of kadak we received was a pretty clear indicator of how seriously they take treating their guests right. And something that comes along with that, as Bazad was saying, was that they don't want to force you into situations where you're doing work. They pretty much want to take care of you at all costs and make sure you're totally comfortable and not having to do anything. So you really do kind of have to insert yourself into those roles in order to kind of partake in the community and help your host family with certain tasks. I stayed with a host mother named Yangdol, and I also stayed with one of the field staff, Rigzine. And Yangdol did not speak English, so I had Rigzine there to help translate, which worked out great. And it was fun to be able to learn more Ladakhi through that as well. And I could speak to Yangdol in some scenarios too, with very basic Ladakhi skills, and she learned a little bit of English too, and so that was a lot of fun. But it was a very comfortable homestay. It was a lot of fun. The food is terrific. All of the home cooked food that's grown straight from their garden is incredible, and it's a great little family life there as well. For much of the time, her father and her mother would also be at the house. And in most communities, the grandparents actually live with one of their children as well. And so it's really good to interact with them also. And there were lots of different ways to be able to engage in the community. Very, very often we would be visiting other families for dinner and for tea. It was probably a pretty odd day if nobody invited you over for tea or for dinner or for something. Everybody wanted to have the guests over and make them feel welcome and just to learn more about you. And so it was really, really a welcoming atmosphere and a lot of fun to be able to do that. There were a lot of other just community events, like making tea or roasting barley seeds that we got to take part in. And even things like community service, we were able to take part in, that sometimes involved constructing new structures for various things. And in addition to that, just being able to talk to all of the other village members about their experiences was really a unique thing to do, because a lot of them have a very interesting past, especially with the history of the region and how surprisingly recent everything in the history of the region is. We got to hear about, the times where there wasn't really even government in the area before World War II from some people, and we even had the opportunity to hear about how much the region has changed due to climate change, and it is very, very shocking to hear some of the stories about what the environment used to look like before that. So there are a lot of ways to get engaged with the community. You really have to put yourself out there, but it's a lot of fun doing harvesting with some of the people in the gardens, making tea, going over and talking to people. There are tons and tons of ways to get involved, and it's very comfortable, a lot of fun, and whoever your host family is going to be very, very happy to have you and very kind.
Thanks, Riker. Moving on to one of the most important parts of your experience, which will be the teaching. So there are a few different types of placements, as I mentioned previously. There could be government schools, there could be private schools, and monastic schools. But it's fair to say that almost all of them are quite under-resourced. They oftentimes don't have teachers who would perhaps have the best English, or even perhaps have had the best pedagogical training given to them. So they're often using outdated methods of teaching. They're often teaching, if they are English teachers, they're often teaching English uncomfortably. And they many times don't have access to computers, but when they do have computers at their schools, they often don't know how to use them. So the schools are under-resourced, and that's why the volunteers are so important. And in such great demand. Every time we place a volunteer at a school, we get the principals or the headmasters from 5 surrounding schools coming over and saying, hey, how can I get another one of these amazing people? And, so we're always trying to figure out how to get more volunteers to all these schools in need. What ends up happening is that a lot of the volunteers' day is split between teaching actual classes, going with students, going through their day teaching English, teaching a little bit of math, perhaps teaching some science, and then if they've got computers, teaching the basics of how to use a computer. But often what ends up happening as one of the most impactful things during the course of the day is getting the teachers in a room and teaching the teachers. Because if you look at the overall experience, you're there for about 8 weeks. And so you can make a much more significant impact when teaching an adult than when teaching a much younger child, because they are much more likely to remember what they have gone through and much faster at picking up certain things like the intricacies of English grammar in a shorter period of time. So we do see most of the volunteers tending to find the most benefit in that. Riker, would you tell me a little bit about what you felt was your biggest accomplishment or your proudest moment in the classroom?
Yeah, so there were pretty much every day. I mean, there's highs and lows, and there are times when you feel like you've really accomplished something. But definitely, the 2 biggest accomplishments that I felt after the entire journey was at the very end, I was able to. The first one is that I was able to hold a debate for the 7th graders. There were only 4 of them, and initially they were extremely shy, hardly talked, even when I would beg them to say an answer even if it was wrong. And I think that might have been because I was a foreigner, and they were 7th grade girls, and they were just simply nervous to talk. But eventually, we worked on confidence and just speaking confidently, even if your answer is incorrect, and that's okay. And we worked on, forming sentences and even paragraph structure. And by the end of it, they were able to confidently stand up and talk and read paragraphs that they had prepared for debating whether or not cows or yaks are the better animal, which is pretty funny and really humorous at times for the things that they said. But that was I felt was a really big accomplishment and made me feel very satisfied. And then of course, like Bazad was just talking about, was being able to teach the teachers, because that actually does leave a very lasting impact in terms of what your time there can actually mean for the school. So every day we were able to hold teacher workshops, and they lasted about 40 minutes. But we were able to get a lot done in those times. In pretty much the first half of our time there, we were focusing a lot on English skills and how teaching English and other languages can also be applied with those English skills. And so it was really easy to kind of go through some of those things with them, because simply, I mean, just coming from an English speaking place, you will be professional at speaking English. And these people, while they might have training in English, they definitely appreciate and love having more help with their English skills and making sure that they're teaching it correctly. And there are lots of strategies that you can impart to them through that. We also were able to teach them computer skills, which was very necessary. Even things like PowerPoint and Excel were things that they had very minimal experience with. And it was really fun for both us and the teachers to be able to teach and learn about that. In addition to that, there are general teaching skills that you can also pass on to the teachers. And when you arrive, you'll kind of see, based on whichever school you get placed at, what the strengths and weaknesses of the teachers there are. By and large, in Ladakh, most of the weaknesses and strengths are about the same in terms of, outdated teaching techniques, like Bazad said. But at the same time, they have lots of great strengths, such as how tight their communities are and how much of a benefit that can be towards the education of the children. So you can pretty much tailor how you teach the teachers to what you're observing there and what you think will be best for the classroom. And it's really it's kind of intimidating to teach adults, but at the same time, it wasn't that bad, because we realized that, for all of these topics, we were the ones who knew more about the subject. And if there was something that we knew that we couldn't speak to and be professionals on, then it was simply something that we didn't try to pretend that we knew, but we taught the teachers as much as we could, coming from our backgrounds as Westerners that have had a Western education. And it turns out that that's quite enough to be able to make an impact.
Thanks, Riker. One of the things we've also had a lot of volunteers tell us is that simply allowing teachers to learn that you can, in fact, not know something and you don't have the answer, and that you can look up things when you do have an internet connection, and you can Google things and you can teach yourself things, is an incredibly valuable skill to impart that you do, in fact, with, and everyone's got smartphones. You have the world at your fingertips. And so allowing teachers to discover that they don't actually have to wait for someone to tell them how something works or how some concepts are can be taught better or more effectively. They can, in fact, arm themselves with this information through a better use of technology that they already own and that they are already comfortable using. And so that sort of journey of discovering that there is so much information available out there is a critical component of this program, because a lot of volunteers take for granted how easy it is to Google something when they don't know it. But when you're out here in the mountains, in a remote part of the Tibetan Plateau, that is not something that you think of naturally. You just go, oh, I don't know it. That's too bad. So thanks for that, Riker. I think I went back. There we go. So towards the end of the program, once everything has finished, all the volunteers return to Leh from their various assignments in schools, and then we set off on some other parts of Ladakh which they haven't seen. We go on a few hikes and treks. We look at wildlife that we are lucky enough to encounter. We camp outside. We've got some very fancy tents and equipment because we also run an expedition company besides running WorldTeach's programs. And so we set up a very, very nice and fun adventure towards the end of it. Throughout this adventure, we also reflect and discuss how the volunteers went through their placements, what sort of challenges they had, what sort of things they learned through those challenges. We have moments of self-reflection, understanding at what points the volunteers felt really comfortable tackling their problems, at what points they sort of felt overwhelmed by them, how they relied upon each other, and essentially what they're taking away from this whole program. Because at the end of the day, 8 weeks in a foreign country isn't going to change that country, but it will most certainly change the people that come on it and show them views, show them perspectives, show them a way of life that they might not have previously thought about or considered. And so it is as both someone who has gone through an experience similar to it and as someone who sees others go through this catalytic time in their life, I find it really interesting to see where volunteers end up after this little journey. Riker, what do you think, or how do you think this program impacted your future goals or your education or your career path?
Yeah, so there were actually a lot of things that from my experience that contributed to my goals and my career path. So the biggest thing probably was just seeing how big of a problem climate change was in this context. In the past, I know that I have always been passionate about climate change. I have grown up right next to Glacier National Parks, where I can see all the glaciers receding there. But it wasn't really until I visited Ladakh and talked to people here and saw the retreat of the glaciers here to really understand how big of a problem this is for communities that aren't as wealthy, and how much it really adversely affects them. And especially for people in the Himalayan area, it's essentially their water source is just vanishing. And so it's very impactful to be able to see that. And that really inspired me to pursue this more. And so I know that that will go into my future goals and career as well. In addition to that, I became really passionate about expanding technology and internet to developing areas, because pretty much everyone, like Bazad said, has a smartphone. But being in an area like Zanskar where there really wasn't internet access that was accessible, you had to drive for hours even just to get a tiny signal, is really tough in a lot of different ways. I mean, we talked about how there's benefits to being able to learn anything you want at your fingertips. In addition to that, I mean, health care is greatly improved with technology and internet, and so is tourism. And as far as we could tell, pretty much everybody in the area wanted increased tourism because they like showing people, their beautiful valley, and of course they don't want it to become overrun with too much tourism, but they want people to be there, and they want people to understand, and they want to have that go into their economy as well. And so it was really interesting to see how adversely some technology and internet could go to those developing areas. And I've always been passionate about education, and of course being able to teach the entire time was really impactful for me to develop that passion further, and just to solidify that passion as well. In terms of where this will take me, I'm not really sure yet, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, that'll be a fun thing to look at. I for so many years seen different volunteers that have come through on this program and other ones, and seen, what they've taken away and where that has taken them. Thanks, Riker, for that. And moving on, Caitlin, would you like to take over and talk a little bit about the application and the logistics of?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak a little bit more about the application process. So you'll see in bold letters right there, the applications are due by April 15th in 2019, but it is rolling admissions, so feel free to apply at any time. We are accepting and confirming people as of now, and so we're happy to speak with you and process your application earlier than that, so feel free to apply as early as possible. So the applications do include a personal statement and a resume, and then a reference form. A reference form that serves as a recommendation letter, or a form that you'd fill out through our online system. So we walk you through that once you apply. And the minimum qualifications are that you need to be a native level English speaker in between the ages of 18 and 74. But throughout the application materials, we're really looking for applicants to demonstrate flexibility, open-mindedness, patience. These are all things that we find are very important in the classroom and in living in a foreign culture. And then also a genuine interest in teaching and the effects of climate change. I think that has been demonstrated really well by our panelists tonight, that it's a very important part of the program.
And here's the second part of this for the logistics. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So the volunteer contribution for the India Summer Program is $4,990, and this covers accommodation, including housing and meals, as described tonight, pre-departure preparation and visa assistance, if necessary, then supplemental overseas health and emergency evacuation insurance, and that's something we work with you to set up. Then they described, I think panelists tonight described really well our training conferences, but we start off with the orientation, then have a mid-service conference, and then the end of service training, reflection period and conference as well. And then it also includes 24-hour in-country field support, very helpful to have, especially if maybe this is your first time living abroad, and it's something that can really help you feel very comfortable to know that you can reach out to Behzad at any time. As well as access to our remote teacher quality support plan, and then alumni services and networking. If you're joining a WorldTeach program, you're joining a network of over 7,000 alumni that have been teaching abroad since 1986. So it's a really valuable community to be a part of. And there's a note there that says many volunteers are able to fundraise the majority or all of their program expenses. I can speak a little bit to that. A lot of times, and we're very happy in our home office to help you come up with a fundraising plan, and we offer you fundraising support as you complete your application, materials to help support your fundraising strategy. We see often that people will focus maybe on digital fundraising sources, so GoFundMe, things like that, and that they'll be really successful in raising a large amount of the funds necessary. I've also seen some really amazing examples of community fundraising, maybe through, if you have any local communities that you're a part of, people have fundraised through their fraternities or sororities, through their churches, through any places that they work at, maybe just part-time or full-time. So there's really so many different ways that you could fundraise, and setting up events with local institutions or local services or businesses. So we can have lots of ideas for you in our office. And I would also emphasize as well that we do get, especially for summer programs, because they align pretty well with the academic year, we get a lot of applicants who are currently studying for undergraduate or master's programs. And I really urge you to look into potential funding that's offered through your university. We have a partnership set up with a few different colleges. Off the top of my head, Notre Dame and Harvard are two of the ones that we have partnerships set up with, where they fund students to participate in WorldTeach programs. But there are colleges all over the country and the world that offer funding for international opportunities during the summer. Great places to check are career services. Maybe if you are majoring in a language, that language department, or really any service-based organizations at your school. It's amazing the amount of funding that our volunteers have found, and every year we're hearing about new sources that people found funding through. So that's something I really encourage you not to only look into, but also to ask our office for help on. And you can always email us at any time with any questions at admissions@worldteach.org, or also give us a call at our office number.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. So what we'll do now is open it up for questions in case any of our participants who are currently present with us can have for us. So you can type those into the questions panel or the chat box on your GoToWebinar control panel that you can see. And of course, for any of you who are watching this at a later date, feel free to email WorldTeach for any of your queries or concerns. Doesn't look like we have any questions for the time being, so I'm just going to leave you with the email address, which is admissions@worldteach.org for your questions, or to get to know more about certain aspects or more specific requirements, or any other details about the program in India or about any other WorldTeach programs around the world. Thank you so much for listening and participating in this, and we hope to see your application soon.